this is Callie Raspuzzi, the collections manager here at the Bennington Museum, welcoming you back to another Tour 10. Today we are here in the Pottery Gallery at the museum, and we're going to be talking about an account book from the man who started the pottery, Captain John Norton. And this is a very interesting, I love old account books because you can learn so many things about them. And what we're really going to talk about today is not really the pottery as much as one of the men who's mentioned in here. And we are specifically going to be looking at this entry here. This is for Ishmael, and he's mentioned as Ishmael Negro, which is interesting because most of the men who, and some of the women, who Norton did business with are mentioned by their first name and their last names. Here we have William Allen and Ezekiel Harmon, Benjamin Harwood. This is just Mr. Double, Stephen Pratt. So it's interesting here that we have a man whose last name is not Negro, but this is how he is identified in this account book. And when I went trying to figure out what the deal was with him, I found that there is a man named Ishmael Titus who was living in Bennington at around the same time that this account book was being used in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and he was a black man. He's mentioned in Hiram Harwood's diary, and Hiram Harwood lived next door to John Norton. John Norton was down on what's today Monument Avenue Extension, sort of down toward Pownell. And Hiram Harwood mentions this man, Ishmael Titus, coming by, visiting them on occasion. At one point he showed up riding a bull rather than a horse, which caused great diversion to everyone around. But mostly he just mentions talking to him, and this man shared a lot of his recollections with Hiram Harwood. And one of the things that Hiram mentions is that Ishmael told him this story about how he had been a slave in North Carolina, that's where he was born, and his master was drafted to fight in the Revolutionary War, and instead of fighting, he sent Ishmael in his stead, which was a perfectly normal thing to do. And Ishmael, in exchange for serving in the army in the American Revolution for 1 year, was going to gain his freedom. Now, there's a lot of different places to go for this information, and when Ishmael was an old man in the 1830s, he filed for a pension. At that point, Congress had recently decided that anyone who had served in the American Revolution for a certain period was entitled to a pension. Ishmael was a poor man at that point. He was living in Williamstown, Massachusetts, and this money would have meant a great deal to him. So he went to apply for a pension, told them his story about how he had been enslaved, his master had been drafted, and he served in his stead. But he didn't have any of the paperwork to back it up. He hadn't been given just discharge papers or had lost them over the years and didn't know anyone at the time who could verify that story. But he gave as many facts as he could. He told them he had been involved in the Battle of Kings Mountain. He had been involved in other battles in the war, and was able to give them a fair bit of detail. But unfortunately, none of that could be verified, and when the pension application was reviewed, they weren't even able to find some of the names that he had mentioned. And I don't know if this is because he was so old at that point, if he simply didn't remember things correctly, or if it was perhaps he had fabricated the story. At one point, Hiram Harwood, when he mentions him in his diary, states that Ishmael claims he is 93 years old, and Hiram doesn't quite believe it. So either he was a very spry, elderly man, or maybe there was something else going on here. But what I find particularly interesting about this account book, and Ishmael is not the only black man who is noted in here. There's another man who is also noted as a Negro, and who also seems to have had a perfectly good last name that was not Negro. But this is sort of an example of the casual racism that was common in the North during this time period, where people were identified by their race rather than by their last name. So although Captain Norton is being very careful in identifying everybody else by first and last names, he has not done that for Ishmael Titus. despite the fact that his neighbors were certainly using this man's last name, and he certainly had every reason to have known what it was.